So I've never really talked about Eastern philosophy or inner peace on this channel, for the simple reason that I didn't really understand it. But I've spent the past few months really digging into the topic, taking the golden nuggets, and trust me, there are some golden nuggets from this school of thought, and been applying it to my old life. And initially it's very complicated and difficult to understand, especially because I've grown up in a Western civilization where even the words and the language I use have been built around a Western paradigm. So I had to completely drop all notions of everything I've known, approach this with a fresh pair of eyes, and now I see how this can lead to inner peace. And I'm going to try my best to lay everything I've learned over the past few months out for you in a simple to follow format in this video, but you've got to listen carefully. There's no action items in this video because if you act, it's actually going to do you more harm than good, and we'll explain that later on. So all you can really do is listen carefully and really try to understand these concepts. And when they click, that's when you're able to have calm and inner peace no matter what's going on around you. This is day 5 of the 7-day mental reset challenge. If you haven't already, make sure you've watched all of the previous videos. The links are in the description. And also fully enroll in the challenge. It's free, and get a bunch of bonuses, worksheets, and action items by clicking the link in the description. Go ahead and do that now. Now, one of the core understandings of the Eastern philosophies that I've been diving into is that your thoughts cause you a ton of harm. And this can actually be quite counter to a lot of Western philosophies that I've looked into, which says that logic and rationality and your thoughts are the things that actually separate animals from humans. We should cultivate these things. But the Eastern philosophies say that your thoughts do a lot of harm to you, a lot of unnecessary harm. And we can think of some great examples of this. If you're in a group of people, you start thinking, do these people like me? And then you're caught up in your head and it's causing you anxiety. Or maybe you're working and you start thinking about something else and you get distracted. So all of a sudden your focus is pulled somewhere else. Or maybe you're with a partner and you're worried, you're thinking that they may be cheating on you. They're probably not, but your thoughts can cause you a ton of harm. And the worst thing is we can't control these thoughts. They seem to happen out of nowhere and they seem to happen automatically. It's like daggers are being thrown out of you. You can't really stop them. You can't really control them. Your thoughts just come at you constantly every single day, and they can distract you or they can cause you a ton of pain. So the first understanding that we've got to get if we want inner peace and inner calm is that you are not your thoughts. We can prove this because when you were a kid, you didn't have thoughts the way you have thoughts now. I mean, you could barely even speak a language, so of course you couldn't form these comprehensive thoughts in the way we have them now, but you were still you. Also, I'm sure there's been times you've been deep in work or maybe deep in meditation, and for a brief second, your mind has switched off. Your thoughts have disappeared, you've been calm, you've been present. During both of those times, you didn't have thoughts, but you were still you were still a person. And therefore, if there are times that you are you without your thoughts, you can't be your thoughts, it just doesn't make sense. And we know that you can't completely control your thoughts. If you could completely control them, then when you were working, you would never get distracted. You wouldn't want to do that, you would always stay focused. So where do these thoughts come from? Well, for now, we'll call it the mind. And if at any point during this video you get lost, you don't understand something, just go back and rewatch a section because it's incredibly important. And trust me, this is very powerful stuff. It's completely transformed my life. So we know that you are not your mind. Well, then what does your mind do? Well, your mind does what it's meant to do. It's constantly analyzing, constantly predicting the future, constantly trying to draw conclusions. That's what it's built to do. But then where do the problems lie? Well, imagine your mind is like a dog and it's going around the garden and it's sniffing a bunch of different things. If you're holding onto the leash and you're never letting go, all of a sudden you're being dragged around the garden in places that you don't want to go to. And if the dog goes and sniffs poo, all of a sudden you're sniffing the poo, you're right next to it. If instead you're letting go of the leash, then it's just a dog running around the garden doing what dogs do. It's just natural. So all of these problems arise when you become emotionally invested in your mind. When you believe you are your mind, that's you holding onto the dog and not letting go.
A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions.
So in order to stop dealing with the suffering from the mind, we must let go of the leash. And the obvious next question is, well, how do you let go of the leash? In order to let go of the leash, you must simply understand that you are not your mind. Your mind is great. Your mind is a brilliant tool. It's fantastic. It does its job exactly how it's built to do. But you don't always have to listen to it. And hear me out here. Here's an example. Imagine you're networking. You're with a group of people that you've never met before, and things are seemingly going well. But all of a sudden, a thought pops into your mind. The thought says, "You're being weird. These people don't like you." Now, your mind sounds very confident, but that doesn't mean that the mind is true. You see, the way the mind gives these thoughts is based on past data. It uses historical data to make predictions into the future. But this historical data it has is completely skewed. Whenever an event happens, it's ran through a prism of belief. This prism of belief is built on actually even more old data, as well as thoughts, as well as faulty beliefs that you've experienced. This prism is not fully accurate, it's distorted. So the historical data that your brain is using to make predictions is actually incorrect, which means that the predictions it's making may be correct, but it may also be incorrect. And therefore, we shouldn't just listen to our mind. There's a chance it's true. Instead, we should collect more data. And that is actually giving the mind exactly what it wants. That's the greatest gift you can give to the mind. Just pure data, so that it can do its job better understanding the world. And some people think the solution to this is to try and silence the mind. That makes sense, right? But what they don't realize is they're trying to silence the mind by using the mind. It's like you've got some water, and the mind is thrashing the water and bringing all the mud from the bottom up, and it becomes murky, it becomes unclear. These people are trying to silence this water, to calm the water down by rearranging the waves manually, and obviously that's just going to cause more movement and more turbulence inside of the water. It's far better just to step back, stop touching the water, just observe it, disassociate from it, and all of a sudden this water is going to settle and it's going to become pristine and crystal clear. So don't worry about quieting your mind, worry about not being affected by it. Imagine there's a boiling tap of hot water that's constantly spewing out. This hot water is your thoughts. Most people just get their hands and they stick it in the hot water, and they're constantly being hurt by their thoughts. There are then two men. One of them lets the tap just keep going, but just takes his hand out of the water. This man is not affected or hurt by the boiling water. A third man tries to completely turn off the tap and keeps his hand out. The last two people, the man that has the tap going but his hand out isn't hurt, and the man that tries to stop the tap but keeps his hand out isn't hurt either. But the third man that tries to turn off the tap actually makes the tap flow more. More thoughts come when he tries to stop the thoughts through thoughts. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, then go back and listen to it again. And interestingly, by letting the tap flow and just taking your hand out of the tap, slowly the tap will start to switch off itself. By simply taking your hand out, starting to ignore the mind, not identifying yourself with it, it slows down and eventually it will stop, and that's when true inner peace happens. Just like when you ignore someone, they eventually go away and deal with their own thinking. You probably think that the answer to all of this is meditation, right? That's what all these billion-dollar businesses have been built around. Meditation is the cure to everything, right? Well, meditation is like being attached to the dog for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day, and then saying for 10 minutes a day, I'm going to let go of the dog. And yeah, you may be very relaxed for those 10 minutes, but the problem is for the 23 hours and 50 minutes and the rest of the day, apart from the time you're asleep, you're holding on to the dog and you're still letting your thoughts affect you. Instead, why don't we make it our mission to try and not be affected negatively by our thoughts at all? And it sounds out there, but all of these Eastern philosophers have proven that this can be done. And it can be done simply by understanding that you are not your mind. And by ignoring the mind, eventually it quietens, eventually it switches off. So there's going to be no action step for this video, because as soon as you try and do an action step, you're combating fire with fire. You're combating the mind with the mind, and this is only going to cause more harm. Instead, you've just got to develop an emotional understanding of the truth that I've just outlined in this video. That's when you're able to quieten your mind. That's when you're able to reduce anxiety, reduce the stress you have, stay focused on the task that you're having, and have inner peace, purely by deepening the emotional understanding that I've just outlined. So there's no action step, there's only an unaction step, which is to understand as best as possible. I will see you in the next video.